Ukraine isn't just collecting tactical drone wins, they're dismantling the shield around the Kerch Bridge piece by piece. This strike isn't an isolated event, it's part of a broader methodical campaign. The final straw will be the Kerch Bridge, and that has got a psychological impact as well as a military impact to Vladimir Putin. Let's take a look at the latest developments from the Crimea peninsula, where fresh Ukrainian precision strikes continue to cripple Russia's supply lines. As we touched on at the start of this video, Ukrainian forces have delivered another targeted blow to Russian air defence envelope over occupied Crimea, bringing Kyiv one step closer to isolating the peninsula. Ukraine's military intelligence agency, the HUR, reports that its drone operators successfully struck key elements of Russia's S-400 Triumph air defence network during a nighttime operation on the 26th of July. According to the HUR's Unmanned Systems Department, the strike destroyed two critical pieces of military hardware, an S-400 launcher and a 96L6 target acquisition radar. To understand why this matters, you have to look at what the 96L6 radar actually does. It's essentially the eyes of the S-400 system. It operates in the S-band. It can detect aerial targets up to 300 kilometers away and track up to 100 objects simultaneously. Well, so they say. And that's supposed to include low-flying aircraft, drones and high-speed ballistic missiles. But clearly, it missed the drones from the HUR. Taking out that radar leaves the rest of the battery effectively blind. And the launcher it supports is no small asset. The S-400 Triumph is Moscow's premier long-range air defence system, capable of engaging aircraft up to 400 kilometres out and intercepting ballistic threats at ranges of up to 60 kilometres. This strike isn't an isolated event. It's part of a broader methodical campaign. In recent days, Ukrainian forces have also hit a Russian drone control relay station, an energy facility belonging to the Chronomorno-Afogaz in occupied Crimea, and conducting a long-range strike against the Tyumen oil refinery, a critical fuel hub deep inside Russia, powering Moscow's war effort. Which brings us to the strategic question. What does stripping away Crimea's air defences mean for the Kerch Bridge? The Kerch Bridge, of course, in this region here. First, to clarify the military reality, an attempt to physically take or occupy the bridge with ground troops is completely out of the question. Geographically, the front line remains too far to the north. Ukraine has got no ability to get troops easily into this area. They don't have an amphibious capability. Western defence intelligence and military analysts point out that Ukraine is methodically creating a corridor of vulnerability by systematically knocking out S-400 radars, Pantsir systems, which are other Russian air defence systems, and local ferry supply lines around the Kerch Strait. Kyiv is blinding Russian early warning coverage, and without the S-400 umbrella operational, defending the Kerch Bridge against a massive synchronised assault using Storm Shadow or Scalp missiles, possibly ATACMS or other long-range naval drones and missiles becomes exceptionally harder for Moscow. Ukraine isn't just collecting tactical drone wins, they're dismantling the shield around the Kerch Bridge piece by piece before launching what could be the definitive attempt to cut Crimea's main supply artery for good. And the main supply artery, it is the only one. As we've said in recent episodes, the supply arteries to the north have been cut, and the Russians are having difficulty keeping those open. The ferries that go under the Kerch Bridge have been destroyed, so Russia can't do that. Ships coming out of the Sea of Azov and Black Sea into Crimean ports to try and resupply. There have been well over 150 of those disabled. The final straw will be the Kerch Bridge, and that has got a psychological impact as well as a military impact to Vladimir Putin. Isolating Crimea will stop it from being used effectively as a permanent aircraft carrier and resupply dump for Russia's actions into eastern Ukraine. But it will also have a severe psychological blow on Vladimir Putin himself, who, as I've said before, held his honeymoon there and has a dacha there along with many of his oligarchs. And the average wealthy Russian always enjoyed a holiday to Crimea. No more. Do the Ukrainians need to capture it? No. Much better they keep it isolated, and therefore it's another headache for Russia to try and find some way of sustaining, using their military capability, not to launch attacks from there, but to sustain the small number of troops and the civilian population that remain there. And now shifting focus to Russia's home soil, where Ukraine is stepping up its deep strike campaign. Just 150 miles southeast of Moscow, in this region here, a massive column of black smoke rose over the Russian city of Ryazan. A coordinated long-range Ukrainian drone strike successfully detonated the fifth largest logistic hub belonging to Wildberries, often called Russia's Amazon. The hit was so severe it caved in the facility's roof, ignited a neighbouring Rosenfeld oil refinery and triggered emergency evacuations across the sector. On paper, targeting an e-commerce giant might seem like an odd choice for long-range strike drones, but in reality, this is part of a calculated campaign to paralyse the grey market supply lines feeding Putin's war machine. The strike on Ryazan represents a major tactical success for Ukraine's long-range unmanned aerial systems. Overnight, deep penetration strike drones bypassed local air defences to target the massive Wildberries logistic hub. The force of the impact and subsequent fires caused a structural collapse of the multi-storey facility, injuring 6 workers and forcing local authorities to declare an immediate evacuation zone. Adding to the damage, the blast ignited a secondary fire at the adjacent Rosneft oil refinery, striking 2 key strategic vulnerabilities at once: fuel processing and supply distribution. Faced with Western sanctions, supply shortages and bureaucratic delays in official defence procurement, Russian volunteer groups, military units and private donors rely heavily on platforms like Wildberries to source equipment. Everything from commercially available FPV drone parts, microelectronics and thermal optics to tactical boots, ballistic plates and communication radios are purchased in bulk through these e-commerce hubs before being shipped directly to the troops on the front line. Wildberries isn't just delivering household goods, it acts as a critical, decentralised military supply system. By dismantling these regional distribution centres, Ukraine cuts off the flow of vital dual-use gear long before it reaches the trench. Ryazan isn't an isolated incident. It's part of an escalating high-tempo campaign against Russian logistical infrastructure. Ukrainian drone strikes targeted Wildberries logistics centre in Prem, marking the furthest hit on the e-commerce giant's infrastructure to date. Sitting approximately 1,400 kilometres from the Ukrainian border, this incident marks the latest in a number of attacks. We've seen attacks in Moscow. Wildberries in Moscow can't be protected. We've seen the attack that I've just described east of Moscow. We've seen attacks on Wildberries up in St. Petersburg. We're now seeing attacks 1,400 kilometres away from the Ukrainian border. Wildberries is not just this logistic hub that is supplying military materiel out to the Russian military and acting as the same supplier that we get goods from Amazon to the Russian public. It is also hugely in debt to the Russian banks because a lot of what it stores is been paid for by borrowed money. It's billions of dollars that we're seeing going up in smoke here, and the Russian banks can't afford to lose that sort of money. It's not only just billions of dollars for the Russian banks, but a lot of the Russian people run their businesses where the stock is held in Wildberries warehouses and distributed directly from there. That stock is not insured, and therefore there's a lot of little businesses going out of business across Russia. This is bringing the war home, and this is disrupting a vital supply line for Russian troops on the front line and Russian military capability. This is significant, and we need to watch it very closely indeed. But forcing Russia to stretch its air defence assets thin, choosing between protecting frontline troop concentrations, oil refineries, or massive civilian military logistic hubs deep inside its own borders, Ukraine is creating structural friction throughout the Russian war effort.